Welcome back to Eternal Rookie Crafts, everyone. We are continuing our gold ship build with her sailor collar. This has been a fan favorite. I left out a part that's not as important, but I did draw a grid myself using my cutting mat here, and that made it easier for me to sort of mimic the pattern for a sailor collar. And that's what you see me drawing out here. Measurements on the screen just to make sure that everyone can follow along. I did have to up this size. So as always, make sure you watch the full video through and don't follow along until the second time you watch it. I don't care what speed you watch it at, but I really don't want you guys making the same mistakes that I did because I leave the mistakes in just to show I am a rookie. This is a page for rookies. So don't be afraid to make your mistakes, but also you have to know that I also make mistakes on here. So those are in here. Make sure that you watch through 2 times the speed if you need, and then come back ready with materials on hand, ready to build this yourself. Okay, so here you can see my first mistake. Look at the sizing. When I turn around, you can see that the back square, that's pretty terrible. That's pretty small. I didn't realize my back was that much wider than the template I used, so I had to go back to the drawing board and kind of just upscale everything. You can also see here that I had left on a piece that I want to cut off. I'd rather have it tied in the front. So you just need basically 2 strings or 2 long pieces of fabric in the front. So that shape that I had there for the neck cutout should not have so much circumference. It should not be a semicircle. So I use my straight edge to cut that off right at the basically at one of the points of the radius. So if you have 4 90-degree points on the radius, uh, let's just say I cut the semicircle into a quarter circle. Make it easy on everyone. So here you can see that I upscaled it. I made the back much wider so it'll hang over to my shoulders like you would see gold ships in the back. Her sailor collar, it covers the white portion, covers a lot, and that white portion is the sailor collar. One of my favorite things about this sailor collar is that you can add it to so many different outfits, and it just adds a little flair at the collar. You can do a normal collar and then just drape this over it, and it just adds a lot of, I guess, style to it. I think it looks really cool. I got a lot of compliments at the con, and then I actually got a lot of compliments at the. We did a food challenge, and that'll be uploaded later. But I got a lot of compliments. Yeah, I'm gonna leave that. I'm not gonna tell you guys how that went, but I'm just gonna say got a lot of compliments. Probably my favorite part about this item of clothing is that I made it from $1.25. I made this from $1.25 pillowcase that I bought from Dollar Tree. So you can see here I'm taking it apart using my seam ripper. And once I get that apart, I'll use the template that I just drew, the actual pattern for my sailor collar. I'll trace that out onto here, onto this fabric here, and then I'll sew it all together to make the sailor collar. So $1.25, that's extremely cheap. I already had white thread, already have the sewing machine. So this item alone is the cheapest item that I made. I would say with all the materials, we could just call it $2, but really it's $1.25. That's all I had to add to this. All right, after we cut it out, here we're pinning everything together. What we'll be doing is sewing two layers of the same shape together, the same pattern. And there's really no right side and wrong side here. You just want to make sure that you have two identical cutouts. That way, this entire thing will be stitched around the edges, creating the seams, and it'll be flipped inside out so that you won't have those rough edges. And I'll show you later up close how you'll do that flip because it's nearly, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's really hard to close that final hole. So you have to be careful how you do that. And I think I got a really good up close shot of how I stitched that together. So there is a tiny hole between two pieces of fabric, but it doesn't really stand out if you do it right. So here we're going to start, and I stitch from the long ends, the long thinner ends, which are the parts that I tie in the front, or I added buttons and I could button them in the front as well. So I'm starting from there, and then I'll stitch along the neck and I'll stitch along the sides. And as long as I leave somewhere on there that won't be too obvious, a hole, I can flip everything through that hole. I'll take it all and pull it directly through the hole, and then I'll sew that hole up as small as I can. One thing that I started doing that I saw a lot of, I would say, more experienced people doing for stuff like these collars and the vest that I made, you don't want too much fabric on the inside. So it's a good idea to cut away from the seams once you have it stitched, but make sure you do not cut that thread that you just stitched. And then you cut little, here I am doing it here, you cut little notches into the extra fabric that's past that thread seam, and that'll make it easier to flatten once you flip it inside out or right side out, really. Once you flip it, those kind of cross over each other and they don't make your stuff puff up. It just makes it look a lot more seamless and nice. So you're going to see me getting out the scissors each time I stitch around the seams. I'm going to try to cut them as short as I can, and then I'm going to cut those notches in them. You also see that I'm tying the end of the thread here just because once again, I do not have a serger, so I don't get those really clean cut seams at the end. So I'll just tie it to make sure that it doesn't undo itself and then cut that short. And then here I go cutting the notches again. You can kind of see a better shot of how they look from here. And again, those will make it look better once you flip it right side out. It'll make it look flatter, more professional. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We got a lot more to go on this gold ship cosplay, and I got a lot more cosplays coming and just events in general. So make sure you're joining in with the community. If this is your first sewing video with me, don't forget that we always sew, since we don't have a serger, we'll sew in a line and then we'll sew back over that same line. You can see it right there, I just went in reverse. And then come back forward one more time to lock in those stitches. But I'm also tying those stitches at the end and then cutting them just for extra protection. I don't want this thing to come unwound. It is white, so I predict running around in Florida in a cosplay, I'll probably have to wash this thing more than I want to, um, because I don't want it to kind of lose its brightness. So I don't want those threads coming loose. There I am cutting the notches again. Just make sure that, once again, you watch this video through once. That way you can make sure you have all the steps in order. Make sure you have all the materials you need in order. And you don't make the same mistakes that I did. Don't forget I had to upsize this for something that matched my body type. I just have really wide shoulders from working out. Here I'm flipping it right side out just to check and see, uh, just to make sure that I did it right. Make sure that I cut those notches properly. And then I'm going to seal the last side of it after I flip it right side out. So when you're sewing the last side, the last edge, remember, you don't want to sew everything inside of the, it's kind of like a pocket now, since you sew two pieces of fabric together. You don't want to sew everything inside of the pocket and trap your fabric inside out. You want to keep that hole open where you can pull it through. But you do have to still sew right side to right side. So that means that you're going to have a piece of fabric sort of pulled through a very tiny hole, and you're going to sew as close to that hole as you can get, and then pull everything through. And that'll help you kind of make the hole as tiny as possible, but it has to be big enough for all or some portion of your fabric to pull through to be right side out. A lot of people will then sew it up by hand. I didn't. I was able to get the hole small enough, but also I'm not a perfectionist. So you'll probably end up having to sew part of that by hand. So here I'm showing you the hole again. Now watch. I'm pulling the whole thing through. The size of that hole that I just showed you was too big. That'd be too noticeable. But I'm pulling everything through. Everything fits. You can see the size of the hole once again. And what I want is to make that hole smaller and smaller. But I still want to sew right side to right side. So what I do here to make that hole as small as possible is everything's flipped the correct side out. So to make it right side to right side, I have to kind of fold from the hole some of the fabric out. So the top will come down, what's inside will kind of pop out the top, and that will allow me to sew while keeping the seams inside. And the less amount of fabric that I have there, the smaller I can make the hole. That's what I'm doing here. I'm sewing as close to the fabric that I have pulled through as possible. And then I'll be able to flip that back how I want it to. So basically you'll be pulling the insides out, folding the top down a little bit, and then pinching it all together. And as you sew, it'll put the seams on the correct side for you. And honestly, this part is a lot of trial and error for me. It was my first time actually attempting that. So I just kept flipping it back in, flipping it back out, seeing how small the hole is. And once I was done, I tied it off, cut what I needed to, and tucked it back in. And then I had a sailor collar. Now here's the try on. Looks much better than the smaller version. Looks better than the template that I had. That was I forgot to cut off a piece. And what I ended up doing here actually is I added pins to the end of the string parts, the long parts, and I could pin it to my jacket or I could pin it to the vest that I made, and it just adds a lot of style to whatever you have. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you to all my longtime subscribers and my new subscribers. This has been a really fun series for me. I know we're only at part 2, but I've done so many activities as a Uma, and it's just been a lot of fun. Be here every Tuesday and Thursday for the long form content so you can learn how to make this yourself. But every day, there's at least 2 shorts coming out just to show some of the antics that we're doing. I'm doing anything but trading, and that's out of respect for Gold Chip. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you subscribe.